Foreign nations will finally be asked to pay for the privilege of access to our market, the biggest market in the world. We're right now the biggest market in the world.
U.S. car imports due to President Trump's tariff plan. Now, that includes about 37,000 cars sitting at U.S. ports right now.
Heard from one woman who even said that the same basket of groceries that she regularly buys has now effectively doubled.
What started as a tariff hike turned into a full-blown industrial showdown. In June 2025, President Trump abruptly doubled U.S. tariffs on Canadian and Mexican steel and aluminum to 50%, citing national security. But Canada didn't wait to react. It had already locked in 25% retaliatory tariffs on over $15 billion in metal since March, and warned of even sharper measures by July 21st if Washington didn't back down. This wasn't just political posturing. It was the ignition point for a $700 billion supply chain disruption. From auto plants in Ontario to aerospace hubs in Kansas, from energy pipelines to public infrastructure projects, the ripple effects are now hitting every corner of North America's industrial map. What used to be seamless cross-border cooperation is now turning into strategic fragmentation, and the real cost is only beginning to show. The June tariff hike didn't just spark a diplomatic clash, it rattled the foundations of North America's industrial core. Within 72 hours of Trump's 50% duty announcement on steel and aluminum, the consequences began cascading. Manufacturers across Detroit, Windsor, and the Gulf Coast hit the brakes, forced to freeze orders, reroute shipments, and urgently renegotiate supplier contracts that no longer made economic sense under the new rules. This wasn't theoretical, it was logistical chaos. Production lines in Michigan sat idle, waiting for Canadian steel that now cost 25% more overnight. In Texas, fabrication plants reported delays of 5 to 7 days as freight companies scrambled to find tariff-free alternatives. Even cross-border rail traffic slowed as carriers paused to reassess customs codes, risk premiums, and cargo declaration. Meanwhile, the financial markets lit up like a warning flare. The U.S. dollar surged more than 1%, a signal of investor panic rather than confidence. Commodity prices spiked, not just steel and aluminum, but downstream inputs like copper wiring and auto-grade plastics. And industrial planners from OEMs to Tier 3 subcontractors scrambled to update their forecasts and contingency maps. But here's the deeper issue. These weren't one-off shocks. They were symptoms of a system that had been built over decades on seamless North American integration, a system now grinding against a wall of politics. The tariffs may have been aimed at foreign leverage, but the first ones to bleed were U.S. and Canadian factories built to operate together, not apart.
Is this America's collapse? It's not accidental, it's engineered.
And the ripple effects. They weren't just felt on spreadsheets, they hit warehouse floors, contract negotiations, and the literal assembly lines of North America's economic engine. Canada didn't just retaliate, it recalibrated the entire playbook. Faced with a tariff onslaught from its largest trading partner, Ottawa shifted from defense to dynamic control. At the heart of its strategy, a real-time tariff-trigger system set to launch on July 21st. Instead of fixed countermeasures, Canadian tariffs will now automatically scale up or down depending on the progress of U.S.-Canada negotiations. If talks stall, the pressure increases. If breakthroughs occur, the duties ease. It's the first use of such a feedback loop mechanism in modern trade, a sign that Canada isn't just retaliating, it's engineering leverage. But it doesn't stop there. Canada's procurement engine is now locked into domestic mode. Under new mandates, all federal infrastructure, defense, and automotive projects must prioritize Canadian suppliers, or at least those with domestic operation. U.S. companies still wanting a piece of the pie must now manufacture on Canadian soil. That alone reshapes investment incentives and could redirect millions in contract flow. To close any potential loopholes, Ottawa added another layer, a 100% tariff rate quota on steel imports from countries outside existing free trade agreements. Material origin must now be verifiable down to the molecular level, closing the door on tariff evasion through third-party routing. What began as a reaction has become a doctrine. With multi-gear precision, Canada is sending a message not just to Washington, but to every global manufacturer: adapt to our rules or reroute your business elsewhere. Canada isn't just firing tariffs, it's fueling a financial engine to make those strikes sustainable. In the weeks following Trump's June tariff spike, Ottawa quietly activated a powerful countermeasure, the Large Enterprise Tariff Loan Facility, unlocking up to $10 billion in low-interest capital for firms directly hit by U.S. duties. This isn't bailout money, it's ammunition. The goal is clear: Keep Canadian production moving, even if cross-border trade slows to a crawl. At the provincial level, the response is just as aggressive. Ontario's Ontario Together Fund, OTF, is now dispersing grants to small and mid-sized manufacturers that commit to reshoring supply chains and replacing US-linked components. Meanwhile, the Build Canada Fund has rewritten its procurement rules, mandating that steel and aluminum used in infrastructure and defense projects be sourced from domestic or trusted trade partners only. No more gray area sourcing, no more price over patriotism contracts. This isn't just economic insulation. It's a structural reshaping of Canada's industrial base. Where the US brought tariffs, Canada brought a strategy back domestic producers, finance resilience, and use public spending to drive long-term self-sufficiency. As Ottawa blends financial muscle with trade doctrine, the retaliation is no longer reactive, it's transformative, and it's designed to last. Canada's trade Counterstrike didn't just ripple across the border, it sent shockwaves through global industrial capitals. In Brussels, Tokyo, and Berlin, policymakers are no longer asking if a broader trade rupture is coming. They're preparing for when. And increasingly, they're turning to Canada's response as a template for economic resilience. Rather than retaliate directly against the US, the European Union chose to reinforce its internal defenses. Green steel subsidies have been fast-tracked, with Germany, France, and the Netherlands channeling billions into next-generation metallurgy and dual-use defense production. Retaliation doesn't need to be loud, a senior EU trade official told Politico Europe. It needs to be smart and permanent. Meanwhile, procurement policies are being rewritten to favor EU-based manufacturers, echoing Ottawa's buy local doctrine. In Asia, the alignment is even more visible. Japan's METI approved emergency aluminum shipments to Canada, creating a new Trans-Pacific lifeline just days after the June tariff spike. Behind closed doors, Japanese officials reportedly see the move as part of a broader strategy to anchor industrial partnerships with like-minded democracies. South Korea, too, is now reassessing its export commitments to U.S. partners, quietly expanding quotas for Canadian steel and agri-tech. The symbolic impact is just as powerful. Germany's Steel Federation publicly applauded Ottawa's agility, calling it a necessary step in protecting democratic industrial ecosystems. That statement, not from a government but from the continent's steel lobby, signals where business elites are betting. The future lies with structural insulation, not market exposure. What's emerging isn't a tit-for-tat tariff contest. It's a new industrial alliance forged not by free trade but by shared exposure to economic coercion and geopolitical volatility. Canada's policy shift has become a rallying point uniting nations from the EU to Japan under a new doctrine: supply chain sovereignty. And as the US insists on doubling down, it may find that the world isn't just watching Canada, it's following Canada. As the July 21st trade reckoning draws near, economic tension is beginning to boil, not just in global boardrooms, but in the pockets of everyday citizens. Steel premiums out of Cleveland are already spiking as markets brace for retaliatory escalation. For manufacturers, it's not just uncertainty, it's pricing chaos. Commodity traders warn that futures contracts are becoming too volatile to hedge. And it's not just a North American issue. The Bank of Canada has issued a stark warning. If barriers persist, up to 75% of steel price increases could bleed into consumer inflation over the next 18 months. That means cars, home renovation, and even soup cans could get more expensive fast. In the US, the pressure is just as real. A recent Time magazine investigation flagged rising risks to canned food prices, vehicles, and basic construction materials, especially in Midwestern and Southern states where Canadian metals are embedded deep in supply chains. For households already squeezed by post-pandemic inflation, this tariff war could push costs beyond the breaking point. But the economic spiral is now crossing into politics. In Ottawa, Prime Minister Mark Carney faces mounting attacks from opposition leaders who are demanding faster retaliation and broader tariff coverage. They argue that patience has expired and that Trump's economic punches require a political knockout. His message: coordination is more powerful than chaos. Meanwhile, President Trump is playing a dual game, teasing carve-outs for certain U.S. industries while holding firm on the 50% tariff line. The White House has refused to blink, but cracks are starting to show. Governors in states like Michigan and Pennsylvania are pushing back, warning that jobs are at stake if exemptions don't come soon. With days left on the clock, the stakes have outgrown metal markets. This isn't just about tariffs. It's about consumer inflation, political stability, and the future of North American trade. The question now: who will flinch first, or will the collision be unavoidable? By June 26, 2025, it became clear Canada is no longer simply reacting, it's engineering a doctrine. What began as a defense against Trump's 50% tariffs has evolved into a broader strategic shift. Analysts in Toronto and Brussels are now calling it the steel firewall. This isn't just about slapping tariffs on U.S. metals, it's a multi-layered policy architecture. At its core, dynamic tariffs that escalate automatically if negotiations stall. Then come the procurement mandates, ensuring federal contracts in infrastructure defense and auto manufacturing now favor domestic or FTA-compliant suppliers only. Add to that the $10 billion loan facility for affected firms, hard traceability rules on imported steel, and a 100% tariff rate quota on metals from non-allied countries, and it becomes clear Canada isn't just playing defense, it's building permanence. In other words, retaliation is no longer temporary, it's the new rulebook. Canada is embedding supply chain sovereignty into every layer of industrial policy, treating raw materials, not as market goods, but as geostrategic assets. Steel and aluminum have become national security tools, just like semiconductors, critical minerals. The strategic shift is already inspiring others. From Japan to the EU, conversations are now emerging around how to replicate elements of the firewall not to provoke, but to protect industrial resilience in an era of weaponized trade policy. So what's the real verdict? This steel firewall isn't just a policy fix, it's a declaration of intent. Canada is betting that in the 21st century, economic independence will hinge not on GDP or trade volume, but on control over core materials. And if this firewall holds, it could become the blueprint for a new industrial age. Are we witnessing the start of a smarter, more sovereign North America? Or the slow unraveling of integrated manufacturing as we knew it? One thing's certain, this firewall is real, and it's already reshaping global trade. If tariffs no longer come with exit ramps, if every factory order requires a rulebook, if friendly neighbors start building walls made of steel and aluminum instead of trust, then are we really still talking about free trade? The truth is integrated. Manufacturing the idea that goods flow seamlessly across US, Canadian, and Mexican borders is starting to crack. And what's replacing it isn't chaos. It's something colder, more calculated. We're watching the rise of industrial firewalls, and Canada's steel doctrine may only be the beginning. As countries from Europe to Asia eye their own retaliatory playbooks and tighten control over raw materials, one question looms larger than tariffs or trade pacts. Where will your products come from, and who really controls them? This isn't just about welding beams or rolling aluminum. It's about power. When materials become scarce, supply chains don't just deliver, they decide. And in 2025, we may be witnessing the moment when resources became diplomacy and infrastructure became strategy. If this shift in industrial power surprised you like this video, subscribe for future updates as we track how North America fights back from EV batteries to rare earths. Comment below, has Canada's steel firewall set a new global standard, or is it a dangerous overreach? Will this help or harm jobs, innovation, and prices?